In the previous video, we created the layouts to display the contacts records using the list view or using a list view. So now it's time to write the code to retrieve the contact details. So we're going to need a reference to the list view widget. So we're going to start by opening main activity, which is in our package we've defined here. In my case, it's com.timbachaka.content provider example. Double click main activity. And I'm just going to close down the project pane to make a bit more space. So the first thing we need to do here is we need to add a tag, a log t, so that we can put some logging or have some logging showing. We also want to define our list view, so private list view contact names. And you can see the imports are being added automatically by Android. And just here, just above the floating action button, we want to put a entry in here, so contact names. And I just want you to pay attention to see, this may or may not come up for you for Android Studio, but just watch what happens here when I actually type this in. So put list view as a cast in parentheses, and I'm going to type find view by ID. And did you see what happened there? So I'll just go back, I'll just undo that change again. So for some reason, I'm typing contact names equals, and for some reason this has then changed. So I'm not sure whether that's an IntelliJ bug or what it is. But if that does happen for you, you need to just, well, I'll finish that line above first, list view. Then it's going to be find view by ID, r.id dot, and it's going to be, in our case, contact underscore names, the name of our list view that we created in the previous video. And if you get something like this and it's not working, we just need to replace the r.id dot in front of that, and then have the name of the ID that you assigned your floating action button, which if you've used the default should be FAB. So not sure what's going on there, but if you see that coming up, that's how to actually get around that anyway. So you can see that we've got our imports added now. So the rest of the code we're going to put in now is going to be in the on-click method of the floating action button. So just down here. So I'm going to delete out this code that's actually in there. And by the way, if you see that, well, it actually expanded now, but if you see how that was not showing correctly before, if you actually click in there, it'll actually expand it, as it did in my case, or if you actually delete the code. So in case you're wondering what that was just sort of the view of IntelliJ's showing the sort of abbreviation for a method that either click it or just type something in the on-click, and you should find it gets expanded like it did in this case. All right, so log D, we're going to put a starts in here. And just to be consistent, let's actually put the fab in there as well, because it is actually the floating action button on click. Alright, so I'm going to add a declaration of a string array here. So I'm going to do string, then square brackets, left and right square brackets, projection equals, then in left curly brace and right curly braces, we're going to put contacts contract, and that should come up automatically because it's part of Android, dot contacts dot display underscore name, and I'm going to choose display underscore name underscore primary, and semicolon on the end there. Now, that's cheating, and that's because I knew which column stores the contact's name. But you're probably asking at this point, well, how would you find this out if you didn't already know ahead of time which fields you wanted, or indeed what other options are available? Now, you've seen how to call up documentation by pressing Control-J on a Mac or Control-Q on a PC. So I can do that, having my mouse or my cursor actually in contacts. And you can see that I've got some information here that I can then bring up, and I can scroll down and find out some more information. And you can see there it actually shows the display underscore name underscore primary. And it says that that's the display name for the contact. And we've also got other options here that we can choose from as well. So that's one way to do it, to try and figure it out that way. But another way is just to go to a browser. And again, it's a good habit to get into when you're looking to find documentation for something like accessing contacts data. In this case, you will find that your best friend is the Google search engine. So think of the key things about what you're trying to do, and then Google those words. So here I'm going to search for Android contacts content provider. So it's pretty straightforward. That's actually what we're trying to achieve here. We're writing an Android application, something to do with the contacts on an Android device, and content provider is what this section is all about. So if we do that and do a search for that, we can see that we've got a number of matches here that look like they could actually work for us. Let's just go to the first one here, this contacts provider, and you can see that's a developer.android.com link. So I'm going to click into that. And again, as I've said numerous times, it's definitely worth getting into the habit of checking out the Google documentation. So they provide reference docs, which can be a bit hard. and dry to read, as well as guides and training docs that are more tutorial in nature. So this particular one here is a guide, the API guides, and it'll show you more on how to access the contacts database via the content provider. Now we're going to be looking at a lot of this stuff covered here in our next app, things like retrieving a single contact, for example, but I do really urge you to take advantage of the Google documentation to learn more about how Android works. Alright, so there's lots of information here, so I'm certainly not going to read it all. But you can see me scrolling down, there's a list here of the various tables that are used internally to save the contact information. And just below that, there's this link here to contractscontract.contacts table. So this contractscontract.contacts table, the Google documentation suggests that it's rows representing different people based on aggregations of raw contact rows. So for our purposes, that sounds ideal. So click on that link and that'll take us to this page. And you can see there's a lot of information about this class and what it actually does. Insert, update and delete, etc. So scrolling down a bit, as you saw me do, reveals a table containing all the names here, or rather the constants that we should use when referring to the columns. Now the actual column names in the database aren't really of interest when using a content provider. In fact, when you use a content provider, you're not actually interested in anything about the database. So we know that Android uses SQLite to store the contact details, but Google might decide to change that in the future. Now, as long as we use the constants defined in this particular class, it won't matter if they use a completely different database with totally different names for the fields. If they do that, they'll update this class and our code will continue to work. So this fourth entry here, display underscore name underscore primary, sounds like the field we want. All right, so let's go back to our code. Now this is where it gets to be fun, if dealing with multiple levels of abstraction is your idea of fun. So just below the last line that I added there for projection, we're going to put in content resolver equals, and do get content resolver. Then I'm going to type cursor equals content resolver dot query. That's going to be contacts contract dot contacts dot content underscore URI and a comma. We'll be explaining this shortly. Projection on the next line, comma, null the next parameter, comma, next line, null, comma, next parameter, next line after the comma, and we finish it with contacts contract dot contacts dot display underscore name underscore primary. All right, bit of a mouthful there. So we get a content resolver from the activity using the get content resolver method, and then we use the content resolver to query for the data we want. So let's start by looking at the parameters that we pass to that query method, and we'll just forget about the content resolver for a minute. For now, it's just something that we can query. Now obviously we need to know more about it to understand the way that everything works in the framework, but we have to start somewhere, so I'm doing it this way around. Alright, so we've got something we can query for data, the content resolver, and that returns a cursor. So the parameters that we're passing to the query method are firstly URI. So this somehow, quote unquote, identifies the data source that we want to get data from. Now this could be a database and a table, for example, but this code doesn't need to know where that data is coming from. At the moment, frankly, we don't care either. Now we'll find out soon enough, but for now, we'll just accept that this URI identifies the source of our data. So the next parameter after that first one is projection on line 37. Now this is just a string array holding the names of the columns that we want to retrieve. Now we're just asking for the display underscore name underscore primary column here, but you could put more fields into the array if you wanted, separating them by commas. Selection is the next parameter, and that would be this one here that on line 38 that we've currently got a null for. And that's a string containing a filter to determine which rows are returned. So think of this as the where clause in a SQL statement. In fact, that's ultimately exactly what it is without the SQL keyword where. Now as we're passing null, that means that we're asking to get all rows returned. The next parameter, this one here on line 39, which we're also passing null for, is selection arguments. So this is an array of values that will be used to replace placeholders in the selection string. Now there are a number of advantages to using the selection args parameter to specify the values we want, and we will look at those. But basically your selection might be name equals question mark, and the selection args could contain the single value Bob. The query would then use the filter, the where clause if you like, name equals Bob. Now in this particular case, as we're not doing any filtering, we're just passing null for this as well. And the last one is the sort order. So this is just a string containing the names of the fields you want the data sorted by. So think of it just as the SQL order by clause without the actual keywords, the SQL keywords order by. So in this case, we're ordering by the actual name of the contact, display _ name _ primary. Alright, so I'm going to finish the video here now. In the next video, we're going to start talking about this content resolver and figure out what that's all about and talk about that in detail. So I'll see you in the next video.